Hi everyone, so the artist that I'm going to be presenting is Sophie taeuber-arp. She was a Swiss artist in the 20th century and most of her work it was very non-figurative. She is most commonly associated with the Dada movement in which she was very influential, but she also presented her art with artists of other movements such as Futurism and Cubism. She was very influential in wherever she showed her work. She was Swiss, but during the Second World War, she had to flee the country and move to France, where she eventually died. The piece that I will be presenting was one of the pieces she made soon before her death, and even though throughout most of her life, most of her work was very angular, so you can see there are a lot of harsh lines and not a lot of fluid lines. She eventually moved towards very gestural art, so a lot of natural, organic lines, and the piece that I chose was one of those. Alright, so this is the piece I came up with. It is fairly similar to the one made by Sophie taeuber-arp, which is this. Hers is called Summer Lines. It is much bigger than mine at 18 and 1/8 and 15 inches. Mine is far smaller. I think it's 8 by 6. It is very similar in that we use the black lines that wind around each other and the gray areas and lines. We also have small patches of color, so I have the blue and the orange that contrast each other. She uses a blue, and you can't really tell on camera, but from my screen it's a very orangey red, so I kind of drew from that for the contrast. I also used purple and green, and she uses purple and a fuchsia pink color. Now, you can't really tell what either of these pieces are. Like, they both seem very non-figurative, but in the text that I read, in what I read about her, it said that her piece represents two bodies in an embrace, and I know that hers doesn't really seem like that, and neither does mine, but I did draw from an inspiration. Well, I referenced my piece from a picture of two people in an embrace that I will try to put on the screen. Okay, so this is the reference that I used. It is probably not the most conventional picture I could have chosen. I feel like there are a lot of other options I had, but it is the Love at First Sting album cover by Scorpions, because I don't know, to me it's just a very iconic-ish picture of a hug. So I tried to portray that in my piece, so it's very hard to tell, but we've got head, and then arm, leg, and then the gray would be the man's body, so they are in an embrace. And I think the point was that it's kind of hard to distinguish because it's just like that in taeuber-arp's piece, where you can't really tell that it's two people in an embrace. As for materials, I used color pencils on paper just as she did, and I also used a black pen for the lines. While I was drawing this, I thought that it would be very simple to draw, but I did do a few drafts just in case, so here are those. I also did a bigger one that I was not happy with before ending up with this. So even though it is a colored pencil on paper drawing that is, to someone just kind of glancing at it, just looks like a lot of scribbles, it was surprisingly very complicated for me to draw. I consider this to be more of a modern take on the original piece and more of a artist collaboration, because I drew inspiration from a picture that I personally really like, and that picture is also an album cover, so it kind of shows the kind of music that I listen to, even though I don't really know what she listened to. But while I was reading up on taeuber-arp's biography, there wasn't really much that I could relate to. She was a very cheerful person. she was always happy despite the fact that she lived through the war, but which I can relate to, but also I'd never lived through a war. I never had to flee my own country. So in that I couldn't really relate to her, so I thought instead I would just take a part of myself and incorporate it into her art style.